Good morning. I'm Pennsylvania Auditor General Tim DeFoor. Thank you for joining me today. With me on stage are Gordon Dinlinger, Deputy Auditor General for Audits, Lisa Connor, Assistant Director for the Bureau of Performance Audits, and Mark Wazurich, Audit Manager for this audit. Today, we will present the findings of our performance audit of 5 of Pennsylvania 13 cyber charter schools. The schools selected for this audit are Commonwealth Charter Academy, Pennsylvania Leadership Charter School, Insight PA Cyber Charter School, Pennsylvania Cyber Charter School, and Reach Cyber Charter School. We selected these schools based on information that was publicly available regarding the revenues, expenses, enrollment size, usage of a management company, and whether we had audited them previously. For each school, we reviewed financial and enrollment data from July 1st, 2020 through June 30th, 2023. Before we get into the details of this audit, I want to be clear about a few things. When I first took office in 2021, we set out to transform our department to do the job the way it was intended to be done, to follow the Pennsylvania Fiscal Code and the government auditing standards issued by the Comptroller General of the United States. One of the biggest transformations our department has done is how we audit Pennsylvania public schools. We decided that we were no longer going to perform audits where we just rubber stamped information school districts sent to the Department of Education. Instead, we focus our audits on how schools are funded and if they were operating within the law. We started this process 2 years ago with an audit of 12 school districts and found they were legally using loopholes within the law to build larger reserves and raise property taxes without voter input. We then audited the City of Philadelphia Charter School Office and found they were doing their job and complying with the law when reviewing new charter school applications. We have never stopped, and we will continue to audit Pennsylvania's public schools. In this audit, we looked how these 5 cyber charter schools were making money, spending it, and how much of your tax dollars they were keeping in the bank. Here's some things to know. During the COVID-19 pandemic, enrollment in these 5 cyber charter schools increased 60%. Because of this enrollment increase and the support from federal COVID relief funds, these schools legally raised their revenue from $473 million in the 2019-2020 fiscal year to $898 million in the 2022-2023 fiscal school year. And during the same period, they legally increased their fund balances by 144%. Let me explain how this happened. In 2002, cyber charter schools became a reality in Pennsylvania. Families had more choices for their kids' education. To fund cyber charter schools, the legislature used the same funding formula used for brick and mortar charter schools. This formula was based on how much a school district budgeted to educate each student, not the actual cost to teach them. For brick and mortar charter schools, this means they are funded by local school districts because of their student population is determined by where the school is built. Cyber charter schools, on the other hand, exist anywhere, so they can accept students from each of the 500 school districts in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. This means that cyber charter schools get paid using 1,000 different tuition rates. 1,000 different tuition rates based on a funding formula from 2002. Let me put this into perspective for you. In 2002, we were still using dial-up to access the internet. Floppy disks were the best way to store and share data, and the iPhone and iPad weren't even invented. Think about how much technology, teaching strategy, and resources have changed since the COVID-19 pandemic, let alone over the past 2 decades. Now, think about how much school district budgets and funding has changed since 2002. In this audit, we found these cyber charter schools were getting paid nearly $7,000 to $25,000 per student without special needs, and more than $18,000 to $60,000 per student per special education students. It's clearly time for a change. Now, no one on either side of this issue is going to be happy with this audit. Some are going to say we went too far. Others are going to say we didn't go far enough or didn't look at the right things. I want to make one thing perfectly clear. As auditors, we draw conclusions and make recommendations based on reliable data, not based on a political agenda or the needs of a special interest group. We get concerned whenever revenues and fund balances significantly increase because it opens the door for questionable and discretionary spending of our tax dollars. In each case, cyber charter schools were legally accruing millions of dollars in reserve to excessive amounts. And here's what we mean by excessive: putting money in the bank that goes above and beyond what is needed, what it would cost to keep schools running if tuition rates changed or if funding was cut off. Reserves are meant to cover unanticipated bills so there's no interruption in a child's education. It isn't money meant to sit in the bank of a cyber charter school growing year after year. These are your tax dollars. We also found instances of cyber charter schools using taxpayer dollars on things like staff bonuses, gift cards, vehicle payments, and fuel stipends. And Commonwealth Charter Academy spent $196 million to purchase and/or renovate 21 buildings, which to us seems a bit out of the ordinary for a public school that is based on online instruction. 15 years ago, in 2010, former Auditor General Jack Wagner first highlighted the need to change the funding formula for cyber charter schools. I am now the third consecutive Auditor General to look at this issue and come to the same conclusion about the need to change the funding formula. The cyber charting funding formula needs to change to reflect what is actually being spent to educate students and set reasonable limits on the amount schools can keep in reserve. We made some important recommendations for the governor and the legislature. In the next 6 months, the governor should form a task force that includes the Department of Education, cyber charter schools, school districts, parents, stakeholders, and the General Assembly. The task force would have a deadline of 9 months to develop a new funding formula that is equitable, reasonable, and sustainable. Next, the General Assembly should enact this plan into a bill within 6 months of receiving it and sending it to the governor for his signature. It's a tight time frame, but we really can't delay any longer. It's already been 23 years. Our recommendation is a nonpartisan, systematic approach to make sure that there are sufficient funds available for cyber charter schools to operate, while at the same time protecting our taxpaying dollars. In a minute, I'm going to introduce you to Gordon Denlinger to go over more detail about how this audit was performed and the recommendations we have for each cyber charter school. Before I do that, let me leave you with this. The most important thing we can do is to provide our children with a quality education. I've been a champion of literacy, in particular, financial literacy, because I understand that our future growth and success depends on education. While recent laws and court cases have tried to make the system better, there is more work that needs to be done. As leaders, we need to set aside our personal agendas and fix how we fund education in this state because this issue has gone on for simply too long. Now, I'd like to introduce you and invite Gordon Denlinger, Deputy Auditor General for Audits, to the podium to explain the specifics of this audit. Gordon?
Thank you, General. As the General stated, this audit was performed on Commonwealth Charter Academy, Pennsylvania Leadership Charter School, Insight PA Cyber Charter School, Pennsylvania Cyber Charter School, and REACH Cyber Charter School for the fiscal years ending 2021, 2022, and 2023. To conduct this audit, we selected these cyber charter schools based on an analysis of publicly available information obtained from PDE's website for the years applicable to the audit period. Information including enrollment, amount of revenue over expenditures, and general fund balances, as well as whether the cyber had been audited by our department previously. We reviewed the independent accounting firm's assessments of each cyber charter school's internal controls, the annual financial reports prepared by each cyber charter school, and we reviewed each school's audited financial statements so that we could determine the amounts and sources of revenue, amounts and type of expenditures, and each school's financial position based on an analysis of their general fund balance. For Objective 1, we performed audit procedures to identify and analyze each cyber charter school's revenue. These procedures included conducting interviews and meetings and receiving responses to information requests from each cyber charter school's management to obtain an understanding of the revenue, billing, and enrollment processes. They included a review of all applicable state laws and each cyber charter school's policies and procedures regarding revenue. They included obtaining and analyzing each cyber charter school's revenue data, including tuition payments received from each of our state's 500 school districts and other monies received, such as federal relief funds. And they included verification that the cyber charter schools were charging accurate tuition rates for regular and special education students based on the sending school district's tuition rate filed with PDE or otherwise calculated by the cyber charter school or contracted party when the district did not submit its tuition rates to PDE or the cyber charter schools. For Objective number 2, we identified and analyzed each cyber charter school's expenditures by conducting interviews and meetings and receiving responses to information requests from each cyber charter school's management to obtain an understanding of the school's expenditures, by reviewing all applicable state laws and each cyber charter school's policies and procedures regarding expenditures, by obtaining and analyzing the expenditure amounts for each cyber charter school by expenditure category, including instruction, support services, non-instructional support services, and facilities, acquisition, construction, and improvement services, and in the case of 2 of the cybers, other expenditures and financing uses. Fourth, by obtaining expenditure data for each cyber charter school, including vendors and dollar amounts for all transactions and supporting detail, such as invoices and board resolutions regarding certain transactions for each of the 3 years during our audit period. And fifth, by inquiring with each cyber charter school's management regarding selected expenditures. And for our third objective, we reported on the financial position of each of the cyber charter schools, and we performed an analysis of general fund balances. We did this by conducting interviews and meetings and receiving written responses to information requests from each of the cyber charter schools' management to obtain an understanding of their general fund balances, including reasons for increases in those fund balances during the audit period. We did this by reviewing all applicable state laws and each cyber charter school's policies and procedures regarding fund balances, by determining the financial position of the cyber charter schools, including a review of the fund balance amounts, along with surpluses or deficits for each fiscal year during the audit period. We did this through determining the amounts and specific reasons for funds restricted, committed, or assigned by each cyber charter school during the audit period, including a review of board minutes authorizing the commitment of funds, and by determining the amount of restricted, committed, or assigned funds that were expended by the cyber charter schools during the audit period. As the General stated earlier, all of the cyber charter schools in this audit saw increases in their revenues from fiscal year 1920 through fiscal year 2023 because of increased enrollment, primarily caused by the COVID-19 pandemic, and as a result of supplemental federal relief funds. We found that all of the cyber charter schools charged the correct rates for tuition, and they improved their financial positions, and that they all increased their general fund balances. During the audit period, we found that Commonwealth Charter Academy, or CCA, increased its general fund and capital projects fund balance by $95.3 million, or 124%, that they had a general fund surplus of $360 million and transferred $354 million to their capital projects fund, where they spent $196 million to purchase and or renovate 21 buildings. Additionally, it spent $48 million on vehicle purchases, fuel stipends, employee bonuses, a family fun fest event, and lobbying and advertising expenses. We specifically noted that capital expenditures of this nature are unusual and could be considered outside of the normal operating model of a cyber charter school, specifically when compared with the other cyber charter schools in this audit. In our audit of PA Leadership Cyber Charter School, we found that during the COVID-19 pandemic, it applied for and received $4.3 million for a Paycheck Protection Program, or PPP loan, which was forgiven by the federal government. At that time, PA Leadership's general fund balance increased by $43.7 million, or 136%, during the audit period. This raises the question as to whether PA Leadership should have even applied for the funds given the intent and purpose of that program. No other charter school in this audit applied for PPP loans. During the audit period, we found that Insight PA Cyber Charter increased its general fund balance by $44 million, or 677%, that they paid more than $1.16 million in staff bonuses, which included almost $900,000 in retention bonuses in the 22-23 fiscal year, and that they provided $82,000 in Target gift cards to 1,640 families that were eligible for free and reduced lunches or homeless in the fall of 2021, having been impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic. While we consider these expenses reasonable given the extenuating circumstances, providing this benefit to families and large bonuses to staff should be carefully considered since it is a use of taxpayer funds. During the audit period, we found Pennsylvania Cyber Charter School increased its general fund balance by $110.9 million, or 103%, to $217.5 million as of June 30th, 2023, which was more than its total expenses for that fiscal year. That it had an operating surplus of $101 million, paid more than $1.4 million in bonuses to staff, and spent $4.3 million on advertising and $625,000 on lobbying. Again, while the law allows for this, we consider this to be excessive for a public school entity. And during the audit period, Reach Cyber Charter School increased its general fund balance by $48.1 million, or 380%, paid more than $7 million in staff bonuses, and provided more than $4 million in gift cards to students and their families, along with approximately $32,000 in rent or utility assistance, more than any other cyber charter school in this audit. We noted that as a public school, cybers should limit access and issuance of gift cards as much as possible, since they are accountable to the taxpayers and must demonstrate transparent and responsible use of funds. As the General has said, the underlying issue behind all of these legal expenditures is an outdated law and a funding formula that needs to be changed. Thank you.
Thank you, Gordon. Now I'd like to open it up to questions from the press. Dennis.
I know Groundhog's Day was earlier this month. I was at the Jack Wagner press conference, actually. His complaint then was that it's like apples and oranges, that if you're coming from, say, the West Shore School District, you're paying a different price than if you're coming from Camp Hill School District for the same product. Is that still an issue? Is that a concern with the cyber charter?
It all boils down to the formula. And it's the same thing that Jack Wagner had mentioned back in 2010. It's the funding formula that is the root of this problem. That hasn't changed. And until that changes, whoever the next Auditor General is going to be, they're going to come back with basically the same audit report. And the only thing that's going to change is the date.
So how do you feel about that? As now you're the third Auditor General to be talking about this.
It's frustrating. It's frustrating. So that's why one of the things that we did is that we laid out what we feel is a good comprehensive plan for stakeholders, the Department of Education, the legislature, and for the governor. Because Dennis, this has been going on for what, 23 years? That's 23 years ago. I had an afro. And
The governor, in his last budget and this budget, has called for basically what's the cost of charter and cyber charter, say $7,000 or $8,000, and that's what it should be, fixed rate for everybody. Do you agree with that?
well, I think that deals with the symptom of this issue. But again, the virus and the problem, I'm going to keep going back to this. And the same thing that Jack Wagner said. The problem is the funding formula. Until the funding formula is fixed, this problem is going to continue to happen because you could do whatever you want to do on one end, but until you fix the funding formula, that's still going to be an issue.
Why do you think it hasn't been fixed in 20 years?
It's a good question. Politics has a lot to do with it, Dennis. I am not going to sit here and lie to you. Politics has a lot to do with it, and that's why it's way past the time for legislators and the executive branch to get together and to deal with this problem because it's been going on for way too long. The fact that, and this is the part that frustrates me, the fact that I am the third consecutive Auditor General in 15 years to address the same problem. That's frustrating.
Let's talk about politics for a minute, though. You're a Republican. Republicans in this building see this as school choice, which is a very hot button topic. How do you talk to Republicans about, okay, we understand school choice, that's over here, but this is excess money and it's taxpayer dollars, and how do you separate those issues? Because for many people in this building, and you want to change the formula, and here's why it's not changing, they see this as the last stanchion of school choice.
Right. Well, and this doesn't really impact school choice. This is about a funding formula that ultimately the taxpayers are paying for. And that's what it's about. It's a old funding formula that for years ago should have been changed, but it's the taxpayers that are paying for it. It has absolutely nothing to do with school choice. It has to do about a fair, comprehensive, and equitable funding formula that's going to work. Not only it's going to work for public schools, but it's also going to work for charter schools and cyber charter schools.
Nobody broke the law, you said, but have cyber charter schools been taking advantage of the loophole?
Well, I wouldn't even call it a loophole. I would just say an old law dating back to 2002. And as you know, if you have anything, any piece of legislation, anything that deals with finance that hasn't changed since 2002, there's going to be problems. And we talked about it. Think about it. How much education technology and funding has changed since 2002. 2002, we had no iPhone. We had no iPad. A lot of that's changed. But what hasn't changed is the funding formula.
As somebody who grew up in the shadow of Steelton and Harrisburg and Susquehanna Township, and you know the financial troubles they're having, when you see numbers like this of reserves and bonuses, what's that make you think? It's
the same, no different than if being a private citizen and being Auditor General. Concern. And concern that of what's happening, but also facing the reality that something needs to be done, and we can't continue to kick the can down the road.
You mentioned politics and lobbying specifically. You found that. How active are these groups in the lobbying, and is that part of the reason the law has not changed?
That I don't know. That I don't know. But Dennis, I mean, you're a smart man, and as we all know, something like this, there's always that politics also always has something to do with it. So, but the bottom line, we gotta get past that. If we don't get past that, then nothing's gonna happen. Nothing.
My last question, have any of, I mean, obviously you're the Auditor General, have any of these charters or these groups contributed to you or tried to get your ear on various?
As far as these particular ones, no, not that I'm aware of. But as far as trying to get into my ear, I mean, you know, our auditors did the work. Our auditors, they didn't reach out to me directly. You know, I removed myself from that, and I will allow our auditors to do their job.
I wonder if I could ask one question, Gordon. You gained, as a former Republican lawmaker, this issue came across your desk a few times as a state representative. What do you see as why this is allowed to go on?
Well, the law predates my serving in the House.
Bills to move change. You've had Auditors General complain about this while you were.
Sure. I think the General's point on our recommendation about putting together a task force that has every stakeholder brought to the table and executive level leadership driving that process is the way to the future, ultimately. The General made that point, and I would emphasize it, that we have to have everybody, not just some people of certain agenda-driven, perspectives. So I think that's the answer to it.
Any other questions?
Thank you, John.
All right, thank you.